Will would get 10 years to pay that bill.
Let's say that's £50,000 a year. You got that spare?
It's more than our profit in any year that we've had in the last 10 years. We've probably buried our head in the sand a little bit about it. I think, back of a fag packet, rough estimates, tax is going to be north of £500,000.
The image on your screen right now, that's Keir Starmer's face the moment a caller accused him of speaking absolute twaddle about women's rights. The shock, the discomfort, the realization that he's lost control of the narrative.
For farmers like Will and thousands of others, this isn't just about a huge new tax bill. Many see it as yet another stumbling block to getting the next generation of farmers to take over.
Will is one of thousands of farmers descending on London, angry at the government's proposals to charge 20% inheritance tax on farms over £1 million.
Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. This single frame captures the essence of Starmer's radio meltdown, but it's just the beginning. Watch as we dissect every painful moment of this interview, revealing why Starmer's leadership is now hanging by a thread. Picture this: rain-soaked fields, filled with farmers, their faces etched with determination and anger. These aren't just disgruntled workers. They're the backbone of Britain's agricultural heritage, and they're fighting for their very existence. Now contrast that image with Keir Starmer, confidently asserting that Labour's inheritance tax plans would only affect the wealthiest in society. This is about the top 1%, he claimed, his voice steady and assured.
Many more are expected to protest on the streets.
We in the NFU, we have a detailed job to do, which is to explain to government why this is wrong, not just for farming, not just for the countryside, but not just for our families.
First protest farmers have held this year. Hundreds rolled into Westminster back in March, angry at cheap imports. The National Farmers Union will gather 1,800 members to lobby MPs, but such is the level of frustration.
But as we're about to see, Starmer's math didn't just fail to add up, it completely missed the mark. The reality? Labour's proposed changes to inheritance tax could impact up to 50% of farms in the UK. That's not the top 1%. That's half of Britain's farming families potentially facing the loss of their livelihoods and generational legacies. This disconnect between Starmer's claims and the harsh realities faced by farming communities is staggering. For these families, their farms aren't just businesses. They're a way of life, passed down through generations. The emotional toll of potentially losing everything their ancestors built is immeasurable. One farmer, John, put it bluntly, "Starmer doesn't understand that for us, this isn't about being wealthy. It's about keeping our family's 200-year-old farm alive. How can he not see that?" As the backlash grew, Starmer's confident facade began to crumble. Clips of him struggling to defend his position in interviews started circulating. In one particularly painful moment, a journalist pressed him on the numbers, and Starmer's response was a mess of stutters and evasions. This inheritance tax debacle didn't just expose Starmer's lack of understanding about rural issues. It opened the floodgates to further scrutiny of his policies and leadership. Suddenly, people were questioning everything. If he got this so wrong, what else was he mistaken about? The fallout was swift and brutal. Farming unions issued scathing statements. Conservative MPs gleefully pointed out the Labour leader's misstep. Even some of Starmer's own party members began to distance themselves from the policy. As we'll see, this inheritance tax blunder was just the beginning of Starmer's troubles. It set the stage for a series of missteps that would leave his leadership teetering on the brink. Up next, we'll explore how Starmer's attempts to address the cost of living crisis for pensioners backfired spectacularly, further eroding public trust in his ability to lead. From farmers to pensioners, Starmer's policy missteps seemed to alienate core Labour demographics one by one. But his next move would prove particularly costly. How did a policy meant to help the most vulnerable end up leaving millions out in the cold? Quite literally, meet Margaret, an 80-year-old widow living alone in a drafty cottage in northern England. For years, she's relied on the winter fuel allowance to keep her home warm during the bitterly cold months. But under Labour's new plans, Margaret and millions like her could soon be left shivering. Rewind to just a few years ago, and you'd hear Keir Starmer vehemently opposing any cuts to the winter fuel allowance. He painted a picture of a compassionate Labour Party standing firm against conservative austerity. Fast forward to today, and Starmer's tune has changed dramatically. Labour's current plan to means test the allowance, effectively cutting off support for a staggering 10 million older adults. The numbers are shocking. This policy shift is expected to save the Treasury up to $1.5 billion annually. But at what cost to Britain's elderly population? With energy prices soaring, many pensioners already face the brutal choice between heating and eating. Starmer's plan threatens to push even more into this desperate situation. The contradiction between Starmer's past promises and current policy is glaring. It's no wonder accusations of hypocrisy are flying thick and fast. One caller to a BBC local radio show didn't mince words, warning that elderly people are going to die as a result of these changes. The emotion in their voice was palpable, reflecting the fear and anger felt by many. Pensioner advocacy groups are up in arms. Age UK has called the policy short-sighted and potentially dangerous. Even within Labour's own ranks, there's growing unease. Some MPs are privately questioning whether Starmer has lost touch with the party's core values. Starmer, for his part, insists that means testing is necessary to target support where it's needed most. But for many pensioners, this argument rings hollow. They see a leader prioritizing budget cuts over their well-being, further eroding trust in his ability to understand their struggles. As the backlash grows, a critical question emerges. Can Starmer regain the trust of this key demographic, or has his credibility with older voters been irreparably damaged? With each passing day, the answer seems increasingly clear, and it's not looking good for the Labour leader. The cumulative effect of these controversies has left Keir Starmer's leadership in tatters. Once hailed as Labour's great hope, he now finds himself mired in a swamp of broken promises and financial controversies. The inheritance tax debacle and the pensioner predicament have exposed a leader seemingly out of touch with the very people he claims to represent. Recent polls paint a grim picture for Starmer. His approval ratings have plummeted, with only 28% of voters now viewing him favourably. More damning still, a staggering 62% of Labour voters believe the party needs a new leader before the next election. These numbers aren't just bad, they're potentially career-ending. As the dust settles on this series of political blunders, a pressing question emerges. Can Labour afford to keep Starmer at the helm, or is it time for a changing of the guard? The clock is ticking, and with each passing day, Starmer's grip on power seems to weaken further.